All right, this video demonstration is for the making of a macaron sandwich cookie. This is a store-bought macaron sandwich cookie from Nugget Market. This is a raspberry flavored cookie with the filling, and these cost $2 a piece. Kind of expensive for such a small little treat, but we are going to take on the adventure of trying to make these ourselves in a variety of colors and flavors. And so let's get started with that process. All right, we're gonna be using our digital scale here, everything set to grams, because there's ratios in what we're doing. And we're gonna start by talking about our egg whites. So if I put this measuring cup on, I wanna hit tare so it gets to 0, and I'm looking for 60 grams, or what would be 60 milliliters of egg white. Okay, now that should be 2 ounces. And what I need to explain to you guys right now is that when we're talking items of like 60, 70, in the 90s of stuff, we can be fine with being off by a gram or two. 3 grams out of 60 is 1/20th. That may seem like 5%, somewhat significant, but when I pour this out, we gotta acknowledge the fact that some of the eggs is gonna get left behind inside the container. So I'm perfectly fine with this being a little bit over by a few grams. So 63 grams. These are egg whites that were separated previously, and I'm gonna go ahead and do that first thing so they have a chance to warm up to room temperature. Okay, we wanna separate eggs when they're cold and the proteins in the egg whites are nice and tight, but now that these have a chance to be at room temperature, they hopefully are gonna relax so that they spread out a little bit easier when it's time to whip them up. All right, now the next part of what we're gonna measure out is our almond flour, our powdered sugar, and our regular sugar for making the meringue. And these can be done ahead of time, these items. But if you're gonna go ahead and make macarons back to back, then go ahead and do your eggs first. All right, so whatever we start with, let's go ahead and put a tare to get this down to 0. Okay, and we're looking for 90 grams of powdered sugar. So the powdered sugar, or also known as confectioner's sugar, we want 90 grams. And that is a 1/4 cup, and a 1/2 cup, and 3/4 a cup. So it's about 3/4 a cup. But again, if we have the scale, we're gonna be as precise as we can. 90 grams. Now the amount of almond flour is 75 grams. So 15 goes into 96 times, and 15 goes into 75 5 times. So there are ratios involved. Okay, and 15 goes in my 60 grams of egg whites 4 times. But let's talk about our almond flour. So almond flour that we mostly work with here in class is a product that we get donated from Mariani Nuts, and these are blanched almonds or almonds. All the skin is taken off, and they've been put through a grinding machine. All right, and these work out pretty well for us. There's different brands that people use. The kind you can get at Costco seem to work out pretty well for us. This is looking to be about 25 grams for a 1/4 cup. So we're looking for 75 grams, which is just about 3/4 a cup. So if you had to do this at home with measuring cups, okay, and again, 76 would be okay. I'll take it down to 75, but that would have been fine. All right, so these 2 items, let's talk about these getting processed. These 2 items, the almond flour and the powdered sugar, are gonna go into a food processor, okay, to get mixed up, to make sure the almonds are done real fine, but also mix the 2 together. So this is our food processor. It's dirty from being used for earlier batches. Don't want to wash this until we're all done. There's water in there, doesn't let the other products stay dry. But this has to be put in so that this black rod goes to the back. Okay, this S blade gonna go in, and then both of these items gonna go in. It's gonna get mixed together for a good solid minute. This may or may not be the machine that's gonna make a loud squeaky noise. It's fine, it's not broken, it's just what it is. This will not turn on though until this lid's on properly, and that is these 2 here and this black rod in the back being pushed down by this part. So I have to put this off to the side a little bit and then turn it counterclockwise till it snaps in place. And now this can turn on. So we're gonna let this go, and we're gonna let it run for about a minute. And we'll do that in time lapse. And we're back in real time. Let's turn this off. Look inside. Okay, so I got to turn this clockwise now. And during the mixing of this, you turn this off, come around the sides if necessary. If you could see from the outside that there was pockets of all almond flour or powdered sugar. Now the almonds are made with nuts, and if they got mixed together too much, they could certainly turn it into almond butter. So it's the addition of the powdered sugar that keeps that from happening, from the fats in the almonds coagulating. All right, so let me slide this over and bring in a sieve that we have. This entire mixture of almond flour and powdered sugar has to go through this sieve, and it's going to get sieved twice. The first one has these bigger holes, okay, and you can put this machine back together for the next batch. But it has these bigger holes. We're going to catch major chunks if we have any. And then we're going to put this through another screen. And we like this flexible spatula. It's curved on an end, kind of move it around. And when we get down to the last chunks, what looks to be like rocks of powdered sugar or the almond flour, we can push against the screen, help force it through a little bit. Okay, and for this size screen and this almond flour that I'm used to, really don't have chunks left behind. All right, now this is going to get sifted one more time. This time it's going to go through this sort of sieve. This is called a drum sieve or a tammy. It's got much smaller holes. It's going to go into a larger bowl so it fits. So this, because it's flat on the bottom, more likely going to use the flat edge to move it around. And then if I have chunks, most likely of the almond flour that don't go through, then I'm gonna discard them. And remember, this was 90 grams of powdered sugar and 75 grams of almond flour. So that's a ratio. And so long as I don't end up with a huge amount of almond product left behind, then I'm going to be okay with my ratios. And the stuff that's not going through is inevitably just going to be larger pieces of almond flour. And we do this to mix these two items together, but also to have smoother cookies. And that's about the normal amount that's left behind. Not even probably a teaspoon. All right, so if we were making this ahead of time, this would get bagged up. Okay, so I reuse those bowls, but if I'm gonna make a batch, I can set that off to the side because I'll be adding this in later on. All right, one more major item to get measured out, and that is just regular sugar, okay, for making a meringue. So just regular, granular, old-fashioned sugar. So let's get our scale back and then start to talk briefly about the making of meringue, which we've done before in class before we take on the adventures of macarons. We have to separate eggs successfully, not break any yolks in. Okay, and so when I have these boats, powdered sugar is sugar, but the almond flour, even though you may not see residue in there, there's almonds in there, and almonds have fats and oils in them. So I'm going to want to make sure that when I'm measuring out my sugar that's going to go in the meringue, that I don't accidentally measure into a container that had almonds in it earlier. Okay, eventually it's all going to get mixed together, but I got to make sure it's done in a certain order. So the amount that we want is 50 grams. And I went a little bit over, not paying attention to the scale. And this is the regular sugar that we're going to use for making our meringue, using what's known as the French technique. 51 is good enough. So let's have a quick review then. We have our egg white, measured out 60 grams, or 50 grams of sugar that's going to go in to make that meringue. We're going to be adding in some cream of tartar, which we'll talk about when we make the meringue, and some coloring. We'll talk about that technique. And then also, folded in at the end is this mixture of almond flour, and powdered sugar. All right, so some things that we want to get done before we start making our macarons and doing the piping is getting our decorating bag together, getting the other equipment situated, because once this batter is made, we want to get right to piping and not be trying to find things at the last moment. All right, so we have 12-inch decorating bags that we often use for other decorating, and the amount will fit in that, but I'd rather you guys try to get with these 16-inch bags, a little bit larger and easier to put things inside. Okay, and what we put in that is either a coupler, okay, the male part of the coupler, or a round tip. Okay, and I want to say this is from a different brand, a 1A. Okay, so it's from Wilton, like some of our other tips, but the A is different. The number 1 tip is extremely small. This is a 1A, so it's like a different style. I can put that inside, okay, to make sure that it doesn't pop out the other end. Okay, I didn't cut the bag too big, and we're not using any coupler. I'm gonna go ahead and put this in something that helps it stand up. That could be a 4-cup measuring cup, especially if you're working solo and don't have another set of hands. But I bent this over at the bottom so that when I put the batter inside, it does not ooze out. Okay, so I want my bag to be ready to go. Next, we are going to get our parchment paper situated, and we're going to be baking these on parchment. But those cookies are going to be piped with a template. Okay, so we've done some piping on these before direct. They seem to bake up fairly well. We didn't have access to these at home. You could certainly make this on paper at home. So I'd rather try to recreate things that let us do this at home if we choose to. And what we do is we just put the paper with the template underneath. So I'm going to start a straight edge. Okay, and then I'm going to get a piece of paper that's big enough for a sheet pan. And the amount of batter we're making could very likely fit on a half sheet pan, okay, and not run out of space. But we don't want you struggling with that, so we tend to use our sheet pans that are 2/3 of a pan, a little bit bigger. They still fit in our oven here. And where you're going to see that might seem a little unusual is that this is going to be done upside down, okay, when it's time to bake. So if I put something to kind of hold this from curling, I'm going to cut my strip of paper on the other side so it's ready to go. Okay, but we're going to be baking these upside down for the fact that I want airflow, and if the cookies were in here, air wouldn't be able to get into the side of the pan. That's why I baked them upside down. And I'm not so worried about this curling right now because we're going to use a little bit of the batter later on, this glue to hold them down. So I want my paper done. Okay, and again, this template will be underneath. We'll slide it out when the time comes. And this concludes part 1 of this process of making macarons, how to get your ingredients measured out and have all your things set up before you start making your meringue.